One sword, black Valyrian steel, forged back in the days of doomed Valyria. Every Targaryen king since the conquest, from Aegon the Conqueror to Aegon the Unworthy, was crowned with this blade. And then, Aegon the Unworthy just went and gave it away, not to his son, not to his heir, not to the legitimate prince, to a bastard. And that is where a story begins that almost no one remembers, even though it brought the Dragon Dynasty to the brink of destruction 5 times. Because, along with the sword, the bastard received something far more dangerous than steel. He received an idea. The idea that in Westeros, it is not blood that grants the crown, the sword grants the crown. And now, we will break down how this one thought scorched the 7 kingdoms for nearly 70 years. We know the Targaryens as this: dragons, silver hair, madness in every other one, Daenerys, who sailed across the sea to reclaim her ancestor's throne, Euron, Cersei, the Long Night, a familiar picture. But there is a branch of this house that the show barely touched upon, and the viewer barely remembers. The Black Dragons, a lineage that sprang from the same loins as the legitimate kings, bore the same violet eyes and the same silver in their hair, and yet spent half a century trying to burn their own kin to the ground. To understand where they came from and why they nearly won, we must return to the man with whom all this rot began, to the king whose nickname speaks for itself: Aegon IV, Aegon the Unworthy. What is the essence of the Blackfyres if you boil it down to one word? Legitimacy. But not the legitimacy recorded in Maester scrolls and confirmed by septons. It is the legitimacy taken by force. History has not handed down their house motto, and there is a cruel irony in that, for their entire lineage was one long motto shouted on the battlefield. Their sigil said everything that needed to be said. A 3-headed dragon, like the Targaryens, but with the colors inverted. A black dragon on a red field instead of red on black. A mirror, a reflection. The same house, the same blood, but turned inside out. They were not outsiders who laid claim to what was not theirs. They were blood brothers who said, "The throne is ours by right, and we shall prove that right with the sword." And this idea that the sword is more important than the scroll runs like a red thread through their entire history. Remember it, because every Blackfyre, from the first to the last, stumbled over that very same thought. Daemon believed that because he held Blackfyre, he held the right. But a right won by steel is taken away by steel. And it was taken from the Blackfyres 5 times, each time a little easier than the last. It is worth lingering on the sword itself, because Blackfyre is not just a weapon, it is a symbol, and Martin did not choose it by accident. This blade was forged in Valyria before the Doom, before the destruction of the civilization that ruled half the known world for 4,000 years. Aegon the Conqueror himself wielded it when he burned the 7 kingdoms into a single realm. After the conquest, every Targaryen king was crowned with it. That is to say, in the eyes of any Westerosi, this sword is power cast in steel, embodied right. And when Aegon the Unworthy places it in a bastard's hand, he is not making a gesture of fatherly love. He is making a political statement that everyone will read. The Sword of Kings is now with Daemon. Draw your own conclusions. And it is all very Westerosi. Remember how everyone in the main saga is obsessed with Valyrian steel. Ice of the Starks, which Tywin melts down into 2 blades to erase the very name of the house he destroyed. Longclaw, which falls to Jon Snow. In this world, a sword is not just iron. A sword is heritage, legitimacy, the very name of a house cast in metal. And the Blackfyres absorbed this logic to the very core. They literally took their name from the sword, not from the land, not from a castle, not from an ancestor, but from the blade. What could be more honest as a confession of one's own essence? We are the ones with the sword. Therefore, the throne is ours. All this, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg, what lies on the surface of the sigil and the nickname. But behind it hides a story that began not with a rebellion, and not even with a sword, but with one weak, debauched king who held a grudge against his own legitimate son. And this is where it gets truly interesting. Aegon IV ruled the Seven Kingdoms with the mother of all mistakes at his heart. He was a glutton, a womanizer, and a coward, and the only thing he succeeded at was his fertility. He sired bastards all over Westeros, but 4 of them were born to noble mothers, and they were called the Great Bastards: Daemon, Aegor, Brynden, and a girl named Shira. 4 names that would define the next 70 years. But the main one was Daemon, and his birth is tied to the first mystery, without which the whole story does not hold together. Officially, Daemon was considered Aegon's bastard by Daena Targaryen, and Daena was not just some court lady. She was the sister of the previous king, Baelor the Blessed, and a cousin to Aegon himself. That is to say, Daemon was a Targaryen on both sides, pure Valyrian blood from father and mother. And when the maesters recorded the lineages years later, they noted a detail that makes one's skin crawl. Daemon's line descended from Aegon III, the elder brother, and the entire legitimate line of Targaryens, the one that eventually led to Daenerys, came from the younger brother, Viserys II. Do you see where I am going with this? If you look strictly at the seniority of the branches, the Blackfyres had grounds to consider themselves the senior line, not just bastards, the senior blood. Daena never named the father of her child. She was called Daena the Defiant, and she took the secret to her grave. But everyone knew who to suspect, and Aegon knew. That is why the boy was raised not just anywhere, but in the Red Keep, alongside the legitimate children. Imagine this picture. A bastard grows up who looks more Valyrian than the legitimate heir, who handles a sword better, whom the father clearly loves more. And the legitimate son, Daeron, quiet, intelligent, bookish, passionate about peaceful politics and rapprochement with Dorne, and who, according to a malicious rumor spread by Aegon himself, might not even be the king's son at all, but the fruit of an affair between Queen Nerys and her brother, the Dragon Knight Aemon. There is your time bomb, planted in the very cradle. And then Aegon committed the act that became the spark. When 12-year-old Daemon won a squire's tourney, the king knighted him and presented him with Blackfyre, the ancestral sword of kings, the very one with which all Targaryens had been crowned since the conquest. Not Darksister, the second Valyrian blade, which went to Brynden, but the royal sword itself, the sword of kings in the hand of a bastard. The court read this unequivocally. It is a blessing, it is a sign, it is a hint as to whom Aegon truly sees as his successor. Daemon took the name Blackfyre for himself after the sword and became, in essence, a separate house while his father was still alive. There is your golden age of the Blackfyres, which happened even before they became Blackfyres, a moment of highest favor. The king's favorite son, the best knight in the kingdom, the possessor of the sword of kings. You would think, take it and rule. And that is exactly why what happened next turned out to be such a catastrophe, because Aegon died, and the crown did not go to Daemon. Aegon the Unworthy committed his final spiteful act on his deathbed. In 1804 AC, he legitimized all his bastards at once. He made all the great bastards legitimate and placed them in the line of succession immediately after his legitimate son, Daeron. It sounds like generosity. In reality, it was a grenade with the pin pulled, tossed into the next king's bedroom. Because now Daemon had not just the blood, not just the sword, not just the love of his late father. Now he had legitimate status, and that changed everything. The crown went to Daeron II, quiet, wise, the very one whom half the court suspected of being a bastard. He married the Dornish princess Mirya Martell and brought Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms peacefully, through marriage rather than dragons. For some, it was a diplomatic triumph. For others, especially the old enemies of Dorne from the Reach and the Stormlands, it was an insult. They had been at war with the Dornish for centuries, losing their sons, and now these same Dornishmen were filling the court and basking in the king's favor. Discontent grew, and this discontent found a face: the Black Dragon. I must be honest here. Daemon did not rush into rebellion immediately. This is an important detail that is often overlooked. Aegon died, the crown was given to Daeron, and Daemon remained loyal for many years. It took nearly 12 years and constant poison in his ear for him to finally rebel. And the chief poisoner was his half-brother and best friend, Aegor Rivers, the one history would remember as Bittersteel. Aegor hated Daeron, hated the Dornish, hated everything associated with the legitimate line. He had personal reasons for this, to which we will return, because one of the bitterest knots of this whole story lies there. But it was he who, year after year, convinced Daemon that the throne had been stolen, that Blackfyre in Daemon's hand meant more than the crown on Daeron's head, that the Sword of Kings was the true symbol of power. And here the red thread is stretched to the limit. Daemon believed it. He believed that possessing the sword and the seniority of blood gave him the right. Not the choice of lords, not the will of the gods, not the law, the sword. And now about those personal reasons, because without them, this whole war turns into dry politics, when in reality it was deeply personal. Aegor Bittersteel was not just Daemon's comrade in arms, he was his half-brother, another bastard of Aegon the Unworthy, and his mother was from House Bracken, and there was a third brother, Brendan Bloodraven, whose mother was from House Blackwood. The Brackens and Blackwoods had been feuding for millennia, ever since they were rival kings in the Riverlands. That is to say, the feud between the two brothers was stitched into their very blood long before they were even born. And on top of this ancient hatred lay another, the most stinging one. Both fell in love with their half-sister, Shira Seastar, and Shira chose Bloodraven and rejected Bittersteel. Imagine this tangle, a blood feud 1,000 years long, plus rejected love, plus the struggle for the throne. It is no wonder that when the time came to choose sides, these two stood against each other with joy. And this is what I realized when I put it all together. The Blackfyre Rebellion was not a war of a legitimate king against a bastard. It was a war of bastards against each other. 3 sons of one debauched king tore the kingdom in half, settling their own grievances. Daeron, the legitimate heir, is almost a bystander in this drama. The real battle was between Daemon and Aegor on one side and Brynden on the other. The blood of Aegon the Unworthy was warring with itself, and that is his bitter harvest. He sired children, gave them power, legitimized them, and then died and left them to tear each other apart over a throne that none of them had the right to occupy. In 1960 AC, Daemon Blackfyre proclaimed himself the legitimate king, and Westeros split almost in two. The first Blackfyre Rebellion was the largest and most dangerous of them all. Daemon was everything Daeron was not: a warrior, a looker, a charismatic leader, a man people would follow. Half the realm raised his banners. Great knights, entire houses, thousands of swords. This wasn't just a handful of malcontents stirring up trouble. This was a true civil war that could have toppled the dynasty. And more than once, it came close to a Daemon victory. Everything was decided at the Red Grass Field. And this is where 2 other great bastards enter the stage: Daemon's 2 brothers, who chose opposite sides and whose personal feud determined the outcome of the war. Aegor Bittersteel stood for Daemon, and Brynden Rivers, known as Bloodraven, stood for Daeron. And between these two, there was a hatred that went far beyond politics. The roots of this hatred are worth knowing because they explain everything that followed. Both brothers were in love with their half-sister, Shira Seastar, the most beautiful woman in the Seven Kingdoms. Shira would take Brynden into her bed, but time and again she refused Aegor. And Aegor never forgave Brynden for that. To the personal was added the ancestral. Aegor's mother was from House Bracken, and Brynden's mother was from House Blackwood, and these two houses had been feuding for millennia. So when the brothers stood on opposite sides of the battlefield, it wasn't just a war for the throne. It was a war between two men who hated each other to their very core. And at the Red Grass Field, Bloodraven did something that would brand him for the rest of his life. He had a company of archers, his personal guard, the Raven's Teeth. And instead of challenging Daemon to a fair duel, as a knight should have, Brynden ordered him shot down with arrows. Daemon Blackfyre fell, pierced by a multitude of shafts. Along with him fell his two eldest sons, the twins Aegon and Aemon. No one knew whose arrow exactly killed the king, for there were too many. But everyone knew who had given the order, and Brynden was branded a kinslayer, Bloodraven. We should pause here for a second. Think about the scale. One man cold-bloodedly shot down his own brother and two nephews to save the dynasty, and that decision would echo for decades to come. Aegor, seeing Daemon's death, picked up the fallen king's sword, Blackfyre itself, and charged into a mad counterattack. He clashed with Bloodraven in a duel and took his eye. But it was too late. Prince Baelor's forces arrived, struck from the rear, and the rebellion choked out. Aegor fled across the narrow sea, taking Daemon's surviving sons with him. And it was here, in this flight, that something was born which would outlive all the participants of this drama. They had been at the pinnacle, half the realm under their banners, the sword of kings in their hand, and that is exactly why the fall was so terrifying. But Aegor Bittersteel was not about to give up. Once in the free cities with Daemon's children and a handful of exiles, he realized a simple truth. Wars cost money, and he founded what would become a legend of Essos, the Golden Company. It was a company of Westerosi exiles, men who had lost their homes, lands, and titles, united by one dream, Bittersteel's dream of return. Their motto said it all: beneath the gold, the bitter steel. A reminder that they weren't just mercenaries selling their swords for coin. They were knights of Westeros who would one day return home. The Golden Company never broke a contract, and that made it the most reliable mercenary force in the world. But its true goal always remained the same: to seat a Blackfyre on the Iron Throne. Aegor even willed that his skull be dipped in gold and carried at the head of the army when the company finally returned to Westeros, a hatred that outlived death itself. And here begins the pattern for which I started this analysis in the first place. 5 rebellions, and each one weaker than the last. The first shook the kingdom to its foundations. The second, in 211 AC, turned out not to be a rebellion, but a farce. Daemon's third son, Daemon II, was a dreamer, a man of art, not war. He tried to raise banners at a wedding tourney at White Walls, but Bloodraven, now serving the crown, crushed the conspiracy before it even left the castle. Bittersteel didn't even support this attempt with his own forces because he saw that Daemon II was no king. The rebellion ended in captivity before it had even begun. The third rebellion in 219 AC was led by Daemon's fourth son, Haegon. Bittersteel finally moved the Golden Company, but it failed as well. Haegon died, Aegor was captured again, though he managed to escape once more. The fourth rebellion in 236 AC was led by Daemon's grandson, Daemon III, and by this point, people didn't even take the Blackfyres seriously anymore. Their banners, as they said, were as tattered as their claims. Daemon III was killed at the Windwater Bridge by none other than Sir Duncan the Tall, the very same Dunk from the Tales of Dunk and Egg. The rebellion ended almost instantly. Do you see the chain? The first rebellion split Westeros. The last ended at a single bridge in a single fight. With each generation, the Blackfyre flame burned dimmer, because the sword upon which they built their right passed from hand to hand, and with it, the right itself dissolved. And here arises the question that haunts me most: why didn't they give up? Why did they throw their lives into the same furnace for 70 years? The answer lies in that very red thread. They believed that the sword gives the right. And since they had the sword, they just had to strike again and again and again. Let's pause here for a second and think about the Golden Company as a phenomenon. It is an amazing thing. An entire generation of men, then a second, then a third, were born and died in exile, in a foreign land, in the free cities, for a home they had never seen, and which their ancestors had lost before they were even born. They kept lists of lost lands. They passed down the names of castles they had never lived in. They fought for Myr, for Tyrosh, for Qohor, for anyone who paid, but all for one dream: for the day the Black Banner would rise over Westeros again. It is both touching and terrifying at the same time, because a dream passed down through inheritance sooner or later turns from a hope into a curse, from a goal into a habit. And by the time of Malus the Monstrous, the Golden Company had almost forgotten what it was all for. Only the inertia of hatred remained. And here is another important thing. Each subsequent rebellion was weaker, not only in strength, but in the quality of the claimant. The first Daemon was a warrior and a leader whom thousands followed. His son, Daemon II, was a dreamer and a musician, unfit for war. His grandson, Daemon III, was a shadow of his grandfather, whose banners were as frayed as his claims. And the last, Malus, was a monster with an extra head who killed his own cousin for command. The conqueror's blood was degenerating before our eyes. A house that began with the kingdom's greatest knight ended with a freak on the Rocky Islands. And there is a cruel logic in this, too. A right built on force inevitably slides toward those who are capable of the crudest force, toward those who kill their own kin for a sword. But there was a man who did everything to ensure that every one of these strikes shattered against a wall. And that man was the very same kinslayer from the Red Grass Field. Bloodraven. Brynden Rivers. Remember this name, because it was he, not some Targaryen on the throne, who was the true architect of the Blackfyres' defeat. After the first rebellion, he didn't fade into the shadows. On the contrary, under King Aerys I, he became Hand of the King and effectively ruled the realm while the king sat in his library. And all his power, all his sorcerous intuition, for Bloodraven possessed blood magic and, as they whispered, had 1,000 eyes and one, he directed toward one goal: to never let the Blackfyres rise again. He had a network of informants throughout Westeros and across the Narrow Sea. He was feared. He was hated. When, after the first rebellion, drought, famine, and the Great Spring sickness struck the kingdom, taking King Daeron himself in 209 AC, many whispered that it was a punishment for the kinslaying, for the blood spilled on the Red Grass Field. But Bloodraven continued to do his work, and he did something that finally broke the Blackfyres and, at the same time, ruined himself. During one of the rebellions, one of Daemon's sons, Aenys Blackfyre, arrived in King's Landing for negotiations. He had been promised safety, guest right, which is sacred in Westeros, and Bloodraven violated it. He seized Aenys and executed him, despite his given word. This was a betrayal of such magnitude that even the crown could not swallow it. King Aegon V, the very same egg from the Tales, arrested Bloodraven for violating guest right and sent him to the wall, to the Night's Watch. Thus, the greatest intriguer of his era ended as a Black brother. And then, as Martin hints to us, he went even further, beneath the hill, to the Greenseers, to become the three-eyed crow that Bran would meet a century later. But that is a completely different story. And here is the bitter irony of this chapter. The architect of the Blackfyres' ruin fell by violating the very law that protected both his enemies and himself. He fought against a house that believed the sword was more important than the law. And in the end, he acted on that same principle himself. He became what he was fighting against, the same disease, just on the other side of the field. And the final blow to the male line of the Blackfyres was not dealt by Bloodraven. It was dealt by a youth we all know from a completely different era. In 260 AC, the last Blackfyre in the male line, Maelys I, nicknamed the Monstrous, tried one last time, and he earned his nickname in full. It was said that while still in the womb, he had consumed his own twin, and because of that, a second small head the size of a child's fist protruded from his neck, a monster in both appearance and character. He seized command of the Golden Company by killing his own cousin, Daemon, and gathered around him the Band of Nine, a gang of mercenaries and pirates from the free cities, each of whom wanted a piece of the world. They seized the Stepstones, a chain of islands between Westeros and Essos, as a staging ground for an invasion. But King Jaehaerys II did not wait. He moved an army to the Stepstones himself, deciding to meet the threat on its own ground, not his. This war was called the War of the Ninepenny Kings because when so many brigands declare themselves kings at once, crowns, as Sir Duncan joked, are sold 9 for a penny. By the fans' count, this was the 5th Blackfyre Rebellion, and the last. And it was here that fate brought together on one field everyone who would later shape the history of Westeros. Fighting on the Stepstones were young Tywin Lannister and his brother Kevan. Steffon Baratheon, the future father of Robert, fought there. Brendan Tully, the future Blackfish, fought there. Even the future Mad King, Aerys, fought there. An entire generation of the saga's heroes and villains received their baptism by fire in the war against the last Black Dragon. But only one gained fame. A young knight from the Stormlands cut through the ranks of the Golden Company straight to Maelys and killed the Monstrous in single combat. His name was Barristan Selmy, Barristan the Bold. The very same Barristan who would later serve in the Kingsguard for 3 kings. The very same one whom Cersei would disgracefully cast out of the guard. The same one who would sail across the sea to serve Daenerys. He earned his white cloak precisely for ending the male line of the Blackfyres. Think about that connection. The man who killed the last Black Dragon would, decades later, become the protector of the last representative of the Red Dragon, a circle that Martin loves to close. With the death of Maelys, the male line of the Blackfyres was extinguished. 70 years, 5 rebellions, countless deaths. And it would seem it was all over. The Blackfyre had been extinguished. Except that Illyrio Mapatis, the fat magister from Pentos, once let slip a very careful phrase. He said that the Blackfyres were extinguished in the male line. The male line. But he said nothing about the female line. And this is where it gets interesting, because there is a theory that the Blackfyres did not disappear, that they made one final, most cunning move, and that the entire story we consider to be the return of the Targaryens might actually be the final Black Dragon Rebellion disguised as a red one. I will set the boundary now, to be fair. Everything that came before this is canon, recorded histories, events, names. What follows is a theory, a well-founded, fan-favorite theory, but a theory nonetheless, not a fact. Martin has confirmed nothing, so we are stepping onto shaky ground, and let's keep that in mind. The theory goes like this. In the 5th books, a youth appears named Young Griff, who is presented as Aegon, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell. According to the official version, he was swapped as an infant to save him from the massacre during the fall of King's Landing, and Tywin's men killed another child in his place. The youth was raised in secret, being prepared for a return to the throne. Behind him stand two men, Varys the eunuch, the master of whisperers, and Illyrio Mopatis, that same Pentoshi magister. And following him is the Golden Company, the very same one that served only the Blackfyres for 70 years. And here is the first and strongest piece of evidence: the Golden Company. This company was founded by Bittersteel for one purpose: the return of the Blackfyres. They never fought for the Targaryens, they fought against them 5 times. And suddenly, this company breaks its contract for the first time in its history, abandons everything, and follows some boy who is being passed off as a pure-blooded Targaryen. Why would the most principled mercenaries in the world, whose motto is built on the dream of the Blackfyre exiles, support the son of Rhaegar? Unless the boy is a Blackfyre. Unless this is their own claimant, finally ready to return home. That explanation puts everything into place. The second clue is more subtle. Illyrio. He had a late wife named Sarah, whom he loved so much that he kept her hands in a casket. Sarah had Valyrian features, silver hair, a sign of dragon blood. Where would a Pentoshi woman from a house of pleasure get Valyrian blood? The theory provides the answer. Sarah was from the female line of the Blackfyres, which means her son by Illyrio, the very boy being passed off as Aegon, is actually a Blackfyre by blood. And then the entire plan of Varys and Illyrio is not the return of the Targaryens, it is the 6th Blackfyre rebellion, the most cunning of them all, because this time the Black Dragon has disguised himself as a red one. There is a third lead, from the prophecies. Daenerys sees a vision in the House of the Undying, and an image flashes there that is later called the Mummer's Dragon, a cloth dragon on poles carried by a crowd at a festival, a puppet dragon, a fake. Many read this as a direct indication of a false claimant, a dragon who is only pretending to be a dragon. And if young Griff is indeed this cloth dragon, then he is not a true Targaryen. He is a Mummer's fabrication. Furthermore, fans note that his entire persona, a charming imposter whom his guardians have convinced he is a king, is almost a carbon copy of a character from Martin's novella, The Mystery Knight. There, John the Fiddler turns out to be a Blackfyre claimant. It is as if Martin showed us the template in advance. But honesty requires us to show the weak points as well, because the theory is not ironclad. First, we have no direct proof that Sarah was a Blackfyre. It is a conjecture, albeit a beautiful one. Second, Martin confirmed at one of his appearances that Bittersteel married Daemon's daughter, Kyla, but they had no children. Some fans decided this disproves the entire theory. In reality, it does not, because the theory never required the boy to descend specifically from Bittersteel. Daemon had plenty of female lines without Kyla. But a sense of ambiguity remains. And third, the boy himself might not even know who he is. If he is a Blackfyre, he is most likely a pawn that Varys and Illyrio are using in the dark, rather than a conscious claimant. He sincerely believes he is Aegon. So, will the theory stand up to scrutiny? In my view, based on the weight of the evidence, it is more likely true than not. The Golden Company is too heavy a piece of evidence to ignore. These people would not follow a Targaryen. They had been waiting for a Blackfyre for 70 years. And it seems they have finally waited. But there is no direct proof, and until Martin finishes The Winds of Winter, we won't be able to put a final period on it. And here it is worth remembering how Martin works as an author, because this is a strong argument in favor of the theory. The entire Blackfyre saga is his favorite historical parallel. He took the Wars of the Roses in England and tore it into pieces across Westeros, and the Blackfyres and Targaryens are a direct reflection of the Yorks and Lancasters, two branches of the same dynasty hacking each other to pieces for the crown. And the story about an imposter being passed off as a deceased heir to the throne is not Martin's invention either. In real English history, there were Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck, boys who were passed off as miraculously saved princes to incite a rebellion against the king. Martin knows this history by heart. And if he has already played out the plot with a fake Blackfyre claimant in the Duncan Egg novellas, where the charming John the Fiddler turned out to be a black dragon, why wouldn't he play it out again, but on a larger scale in the main saga? It is absolutely in his style. He loves it when the reader is sure of one thing, and the truth turns out to be inverted, red inside out, black. There is another touch, purely thematic. Martin's entire saga is built on debunking fairy tales. Noble Ned loses his head for honor. The beautiful prince Rhaegar sparked a war by running off with another man's betrothed. So, the story of a miraculously surviving rightful heir who will return and save the kingdom is the most fairy tale-like fairy tale of them all. And if Martin is true to himself, he will debunk this fairy tale. He will show that the boy with silver in his hair is not at all who he claims to be. That beneath the red dragon, there is actually a black one. That would be very much in his spirit. Although I admit that is precisely why a cautious reader should keep their distance. It all fits together too beautifully. And when a theory fits together too beautifully, sometimes it means we are building the picture to suit our own expectations. So what was this house? What were the Blackfyres, really? I think this is their main tragedy and their main lesson. The Blackfyres were born from a single idea, that the sword gives the crown, not blood or law. Aegon the Unworthy placed this idea into the hands of a bastard along with the sword Blackfyre, and it proved more poisonous than any blade. Because if the sword grants the right, then it can always be taken away by another sword, and it was taken away 5 times. Daemon believed that possessing the Sword of Kings made him a king, but Blackfyre did not make him a king. It made him a corpse on the red grass field, pierced by the arrows of Bloodraven, who didn't even bother to draw his own Valyrian blade. And now the pattern we started with returns with a new meaning. Each rebellion was weaker than the last, not because the Blackfyres were unlucky, but because their foundation was built on sand, on the idea of force, which is by definition temporary. You cannot take away blood. Law, in the worst case, can be rewritten, but a sword can always be snatched from weakening hands. And with each generation, the hands of the Blackfyres grew weaker, until the last of them fell on the stepstones by the blade of a boy who would later spend 40 years guarding very different kings. A house that came from the same loins as the Targaryens, a house that wore the same silver in their hair and the same purple eyes, a house that could have become a dynasty if it had understood one simple thing, the very thing that the quiet, bookish, unloved Daeron II understood, that the 7 kingdoms are held together not by the sharpest sword, but by patience, by marriages, by law, and by the ability to wait. Daeron brought Dorne in with peace. Daemon tried to take the throne with steel. One founded a line that reached to Daenerys. The other founded a line of corpses stretching from the red grass field to the stepstones. Aegon the Unworthy gave a bastard the Sword of Kings and thought he was gifting him a future. In reality, he gifted him a curse. Because in Westeros, a black flame burns brightly, but not for long. But a quiet, inconspicuous red ember of legitimate blood is capable of smoldering for centuries and, at the right moment, flaring up again. And perhaps, right now, under the guise of a boy with silver in his hair and the golden company at his back, the black flame is preparing to flare up one last time. If so, it will be the longest revenge in the history of Westeros, a revenge that has been waiting for its hour for 70 years. Write in the comments whether you believe young Griff is the last Blackfyre or if he is the true son of Rhaegar after all, and subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown.